Welcome to the Sleep Hours, the only place where cartoons fall asleep before you do. So grab your blanket, tuck in your favorite plushie, and let's get weird. Have you ever wondered what secrets the forest might keep when the sun goes down? Or how even the smallest lantern flame can guide you into places you've never seen before? Tonight we journey into the strange and wonderful town of Gravity Falls, where Dipper, Mabel, Wendy, and Grunkle Stan set out on a lantern walk that becomes far more than just a stroll through the woods. What hidden places will they discover? What whispers wait in the shadows of the night? Settle in, get comfortable, and let the glow of this story carry you gently toward sleep. The evening had settled over Gravity Falls like a quilt of deep blue velvet, stitched with the first glimmering stars. The forest around the Mystery Shack was alive with quiet whispers, leaves rustling gently in the breeze, a chorus of crickets tuning their sleepy melody, and the distant call of an owl echoing through the pines. Inside the shack, the usual bustle of the day had faded. The gift shop lights were dim, the closed sign hung crookedly in the window, and the faint smell of pine sap and old wood clung to the air. Dipper stood by the door, lantern in hand. Its glass sides glowed with a soft golden warmth, flickering in rhythm with his breathing. He had insisted earlier that they needed to test the lanterns Grunkle Stan had found in a dusty box in the attic, though the real reason had little to do with testing anything. Dipper loved the forest at night, the strange beauty of it, the mystery it held. It always felt like the world grew bigger when the sun went down. Mabel bounded down the stairs behind them, carrying her lantern like it was a prized treasure. She had already decorated it with bright stickers of stars and glittery shapes she had cut out of an old craft kit. The glow from inside made the glitter shimmer, scattering tiny flecks of light across the walls. "Lantern twins," she announced proudly, holding her lantern up next to Dipper's. "Yours is all plain and serious, but mine has pizzazz. If these lanterns had a beauty pageant, mine would totally win." Dipper gave her the usual look, the kind that said he was trying very hard not to smile, but failing just a little. "Mabel, they're lanterns. They don't compete in beauty pageants." "Well, not with that attitude," she said, puffing up her cheeks before giggling. "Besides, it's nighttime. The forest deserves a little sparkle." From the living room, Grunkle Stan shuffled in, already wearing his coat, even though the night was mild. He had his lantern, too, though his looked more like a tool than anything magical. Dented on one side, the handle a bit bent, the flame inside flickering unevenly. "All right, let's get this over with," Stan muttered. "If I trip over one tree root out there, I'm suing the forest." "Can you sue a forest?" Mabel asked, her eyes wide with exaggerated curiosity. "Kid, I've sued worse." Dipper rolled his eyes, but there was affection in it. He knew Stan secretly liked these kinds of things. Even if his grumbling never stopped, there was a softness in the way Stan lingered by the door, waiting for them to be ready. Wendy was the last to appear, hands tucked in her pockets as usual. She had slung her lantern casually by her side, its light brushing softly across the wooden floor. Her red hair caught the glow in strands of copper, and her relaxed smile made the whole room feel less stiff. "So," she said, glancing at the twins, "lantern walk, huh? You guys know it's not like a real tradition, right? You just made this up." "That's the best kind of tradition," Mabel declared. "We're pioneers of fun," Wendy chuckled, shaking her head. "Fair enough. Lead the way, pioneers." The door creaked open, and the night spilled in, cool, fresh, and carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. One by one they stepped out into the open air, their lanterns glowing like fireflies caught in jars. The forest welcomed them with its stillness, Shadows stretched long between the trees, but the golden circles of lantern light made the darkness less intimidating, almost gentle. Mabel swung her lantern in little arcs, making the light dance across the ground. Dipper walked carefully, scanning the shadows out of habit, though tonight he wasn't worried. For once, there were no ominous books to decipher, no supernatural creatures to track, just the forest, quiet and endless, waiting for them. Stan muttered about bugs already biting his ankles, though he hadn't actually been bitten yet, and Wendy walked a step behind, her calm presence grounding the group. Every so often, she would point out a shape in the trees or the way the mist curled near the ground, noticing the details that made the night more beautiful and eerie. The path wound gently downward, leading them toward the deeper woods. The lantern's glow pooled against the ferns and roots, and their footsteps fell in an easy rhythm. Dipper's steady, Mabel's skipping, Stan's shuffling, Wendy's unhurried stride. For a long moment, none of them spoke. They didn't need to. The forest itself filled the silence with its quiet symphony. Finally, Mabel broke it. "This is so magical," she whispered, almost reverently, as if afraid the forest would hear and stop being magical if she spoke too loudly. "It's like we're in a fairy tale. Except, with fewer talking animals, unless you count Grunkle Stan." Stan snorted. "Ha ha. Very funny. I'll have you know, back in the day, I was a legend in the talking animal community." Wendy raised an eyebrow, smirking. "What, like squirrels used to ask you for advice?" "Better. They used to owe me money." The group laughed, their voices mingling with the sound of the woods. Even Dipper chuckled, shaking his head at the ridiculousness. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The night was theirs, filled with soft lantern light and easy company. The forest seemed to grow thicker as they walked, branches weaving overhead like the rafters of some ancient cathedral. The lanterns painted everything in soft golds and shadows, turning each leaf into a tiny piece of stained glass, each pebble into something mysterious. The trail was familiar. Dipper had mapped most of these woods before, but at night even well-known places felt transformed. He slowed for a moment, adjusting the strap of his journal bag, though he hadn't brought the actual journals tonight. This was supposed to be different, a break from chasing mysteries and trying to solve puzzles. Still, he couldn't help but glance at the edges of the path, noticing the faint shimmer of dew on spiderwebs, the soft glow of mushrooms that thrived in the dark. His eyes were always searching, even when he told himself not to. Mabel walked a little ahead, her lantern swinging wider now, casting moving shapes across the trees. "Look at that one," she exclaimed, pointing toward a crooked pine that bent almost into a loop. "If you squint, it looks like a giant pretzel, a magical forest pretzel." "Don't say pretzel," Stan grumbled. "You're going to make me hungry. We should have brought snacks." "You did bring snacks," Wendy reminded him. "I saw you shove a whole bag of jerky in your pocket." Stan froze for half a second before sighing. "Fine, maybe I did. But it's for emergencies. Like if a bear shows up, I can throw the jerky and run the other way." Mabel gasped dramatically. "How could you sacrifice the jerky like that? That jerky has feelings, Stan." "Kid, if jerky had feelings, it'd be feeling delicious." Wendy chuckled, and Dipper shook his head again, though his smile lingered longer this time. It felt good to laugh without the edge of danger, without the looming weight of another mystery hanging over them. They reached a clearing, small but open enough for the sky to spill through. The stars above were sharp and bright, scattered across the heavens in patterns both familiar and strange. Mabel immediately flopped onto the grass, holding her lantern above her like a glowing star of her own. "Okay, new rule," she declared, staring up. "We each have to name one constellation. But it doesn't have to be real. It can be whatever we see." Dipper sat down too, though more carefully, setting his lantern beside him. "You mean like Pretend constellations? Exactly. Mine is... She squinted dramatically, then threw her arm toward the sky. The sparkle unicorn! See, right there? The tail is kind of squiggly, and the horn is super pointy. Majestic. Stan plopped down with a grunt, placing his lantern by his knee. I see a $sign, big and beautiful. The universe knows where it's at. That's not even close, Dipper muttered, though he was smiling despite himself. He traced the sky with his finger, his voice softer than usual. That cluster there looks like a compass, like the one on the Mystery Shack side. Wendy leaned back, resting on her elbows, her lantern glowing at her side. She tilted her head, eyes relaxed. I see. A giant hammock, like the comfiest hammock in the world. If the stars could rock you to sleep, that's where I'd be. Mabel clasped her hands together with delight. Perfect. We've got unicorns, money, compasses, and hammocks. Basically, the essentials of life. The air grew still in the clearing, the kind of stillness that didn't feel empty but alive, like the forest was listening. Fireflies began to drift between the tall grass, tiny lanterns of their own, weaving lazy patterns. The group sat quietly for a while, just breathing, letting the night settle around them. Eventually, Stan cleared his throat. All right, this is nice and all, but we're not just going to sit around stargazing all night, right? We're supposed to be walking. Mabel hopped up instantly, as if she'd been waiting for the cue. Lantern squad, onward, she cried, holding her lantern high. Wendy rose with her easy grace, brushing grass off her jeans, while Dipper picked up his lantern, feeling a warmth inside that wasn't just from the flame. He didn't always say it, but moments like this, where things were calm, where Mabel was laughing and Stan wasn't scheming too hard, where Wendy was just Wendy. These moments mattered. They picked up the path again, their lanterns swinging, their shadows stretching long behind them. As they moved deeper into the forest, the trees grew taller, their trunks rising like pillars. A thin mist curled low to the ground, clinging to roots and stones, making the lantern's glow look brighter against the haze. Mabel skipped ahead a few paces, her voice echoing softly as she hummed a tune she made up on the spot. Dipper caught himself smiling again, glancing at her carefree steps, before his attention drifted to the way the mist seemed to shift. It wasn't threatening. Nothing about tonight felt threatening. But it was strange how the forest could look completely different just by changing the light. Beside him, Wendy walked in her calm stride, shoulders loose, lantern swinging like it weighed nothing. She looked around with the kind of ease that made Dipper wonder if anything ever rattled her. Maybe that's why he liked these walks with her. Her calm balanced his constant need to figure everything out. Stan, predictably, muttered about his shoes getting wet in the mist, though no one listened too closely. They passed under a wide arch of branches that formed a natural gateway. Beyond it, the forest seemed even quieter, as if the sound of the outside world had been hushed. Their lanterns became the only moving lights in a sea of shadow and silver moonlight. "Whoa," Mabel whispered, stopping in her tracks. "It feels like we just stepped into a secret world." And in that moment, it really did. The air beneath the arch was cooler, touched with the faint scent of moss and damp stone. The trees seemed older here, their trunks wide and knotted, their roots twisting across the ground like the veins of the earth. The mist hugged the ground in soft ripples, catching the lantern light so that each step sent shadows curling outward. Dipper slowed again, his brow furrowed as his eyes tracked the patterns in the roots. He wasn't worried, not tonight, but he couldn't help noticing the strange geometry of the way the roots spread, like they had grown deliberately, guiding the path. He lifted his lantern higher, the flame wobbling inside the glass. Don't tell me you're going to start analyzing tree roots now, Stan said, shuffling past him. Kid, sometimes a root is just a root, unless it's a root beer, in which case it's delicious. Mabel giggled. Root beer. Grunkle Stan, you're officially my new favorite constellation. Dipper rolled his eyes, but the tension slipped from his shoulders. He let the roots be roots, at least for tonight. The path wound deeper into the hush of the woods. A few times the forest offered small wonders, an owl blinking at them from a low branch, its eyes shining like twin lanterns, a patch of luminous mushrooms glowing faintly blue in the dark, a stream so quiet it sounded like glass when it trickled over stones. Mabel stopped at the mushrooms, crouching beside them with wide eyes. These are like nightlights from nature, she whispered. If I were a fairy, I'd totally live here. Pretty sure you already live like a fairy, Wendy said, leaning casually against a tree, her lantern painting her in copper light. Except instead of wings, you've got, like, endless sweaters. Mabel gasped, as if it were the greatest compliment in the world. Sweater fairy! That's me! She spun in a circle with her lantern, laughing softly. The golden glow and the blue shimmer of the mushrooms tangled together, making the clearing sparkle like something out of her imagination. Dipper crouched too, examining the fungi without touching them. His instinct was to jot down notes, sketch the way they clustered, but he resisted. Tonight wasn't about the journal. Tonight was about being here. He stood again, lantern steady in his hand. They kept moving, the ground sloping upward now. The mist thinned as the air grew clearer, until they found themselves climbing a gentle ridge. The higher they went, the brighter the stars became, as if the forest had been hiding them until the right moment. By the time they reached the top, the trees opened into another clearing, larger than the last, ringed with pines that stood like guardians. In the center was a flat patch of grass, soft and silver under the moonlight. It looked almost like a stage waiting for them. Mabel was the first to run forward, planting her lantern in the ground as if it were a flag. The golden glow spread, and she spun around it like a dancer. Ta-da! Lantern land! Stan trudged in after her, setting his lantern down with far less ceremony. Lantern land, huh? Does Lantern Land have snacks? 'Cause if not, I'm filing a complaint. Everything doesn't need snacks, Dipper muttered. Yes, it does, Stan countered immediately. That's the foundation of society, kid. Snacks and complaining. Without those, civilization crumbles. Wendy strolled into the clearing last, lowering her lantern until it rested on the grass. She lay back beside it, arms folded behind her head, her eyes turned toward the sky. Not bad, she said softly. Could be worse ways to spend a night. Mabel plopped down beside her, her sweater puffing with air as she landed. She leaned close, lantern between them, her face glowing in the light. It's like our own little galaxy down here. We're the stars. We're star people. Stan groaned, but sat anyway, rubbing his knees. Dipper joined them too, setting his lantern near the others. The four flames flickered together, their circles of light overlapping into one golden pool. The darkness beyond it wasn't frightening. It was simply there, stretching out endlessly, while their little patch of light held them close. For a long time, they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The quiet was gentle, broken only by the occasional sound of the forest. A breeze shifting through the branches, a distant nightbird calling, the faint creak of trees settling into the earth. Dipper leaned back on his elbows, watching the stars from this higher vantage point. It seemed so sharp up here, the Milky Way cutting across the sky like a path of silver dust. He wondered what mysteries those stars held, what answers they kept hidden. But for once, he didn't feel the urgency to chase them. It was enough to simply see them. Mabel hummed softly, some tune only she knew, and the lanterns swayed gently in the night air, as though they were listening too. The glow of the lanterns made the clearing feel like a hidden camp, a place untouched by time. The flames flickered softly, throwing shadows that stretched and danced across the trees, as if the forest itself were moving with them. Mabel propped herself up on her elbows, gazing at the way the lantern circles overlapped. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said, her voice quieter now, almost hushed by the weight of the night. "Those little forts we used to make out of blankets. Remember Dipper? Back home?" Dipper nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting faintly. "Yeah, except those were usually in the living room, not in the middle of a mysterious forest. Blanket forts, forest forts. It's all the same," she said with a dreamy sigh. "It's just about being together." Stan adjusted his hat, pretending not to be listening, though the way he leaned back a little more comfortably gave him away. "Back when I was a kid, forts meant plywood, nails, and the occasional lawsuit," he muttered. "But sure, lantern forts. Why not?" Wendy smirked, her eyes on the stars. "I think it's awesome. Kind of feel like we're glowing too, you know? Like the lanterns aren't just lighting up the forest, they're lighting us up, making us stand out against all this dark." For a moment, none of them said anything. They just breathed in the cool night air, the scent of pine and earth filling their lungs. The quiet was soothing, steady, almost like a heartbeat. Then Mabel sat up suddenly, clapping her hands together. "Okay, new idea. We each make a wish. Not like a birthday wish, though. A forest wish. You gotta keep it secret, and you can't tell anyone, or else it won't come true." Stan groaned. "What are we, throwing coins into a fountain now?" "Yes," Mabel said brightly. "But like an invisible fountain. A fountain of dreams." Dipper rolled his eyes, but he found himself closing them anyway. He thought of what he'd wished for. He didn't whisper it, didn't write it down. He just let the thoughts settle in his chest like a hidden ember. Wendy tilted her head, her smile faint but genuine. She didn't say what she wished for either, though the calm on her face said plenty. Even Stan went quiet, his grumble dying down into a thoughtful silence. He didn't admit it, of course, but his eyes softened as the lantern light flickered across them. Mabel, on the other hand, squeezed her eyes shut, scrunched up her face, and whispered so fast that no one could understand a word. When she opened them again, she looked utterly content, as if the forest itself had taken her wish and tucked it safely away. The lanterns swayed faintly into the night breeze, their flames steady despite the movement. It almost felt like the forest was listening, holding their wishes the way it held their light. Dipper lay back, his lantern beside him, and stared upward again. The stars looked different now, not like puzzles waiting to be solved, but like silent companions scattered across the sky. He let the thought rest in his mind, simple and quiet. Maybe not every mystery needed to be solved. Some could just be appreciated. Stan shifted, his joints cracking as he stretched out. "All right," he muttered. "I'll admit it. This is not the worst idea you kids ever had. Don't tell anybody I said that." Mabel gasped, her grin wide and mischievous. "Oh my gosh, you like the lantern walk. You're secretly having fun." Stan scowled. "I said don't tell anybody. That includes me." Wendy laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're all ridiculous, but this is nice." The flames glowed on, steady and warm, as the forest wrapped them in its quiet embrace. The night deepened, and the lanterns became the heart of the clearing, 4 little suns holding back the dark. The forest didn't press in on them. Instead, it seemed to stand watch, its tall pines like silent guardians. A breeze drifted through, cool but kind, stirring the flames so they shimmered like golden stars on the ground. Mabel curled onto her side, hugging her knees, her lantern close enough to warm her face. "I hope we do this every night," she murmured, her voice thick with drowsiness. Dipper smiled faintly, adjusting his cap as he lay back again. "Maybe not every night," he whispered. "But, yeah, this was a good idea." Stan tipped his hat lower over his eyes, disguising the way he'd already begun to drift. "Don't get used to it," he muttered, though even his gruff tone sounded softer now. Wendy stretched, arms behind her head, gazing up at the infinite sky. "Yeah," she said simply, her voice a calm sigh. "This is good." And with the lanterns glowing steady, the forest held them close, like a lullaby woven in light. The path widened as the trees slowly began to thin. The forest, which had felt dense and secretive just moments ago, softened into something more open. A cool breeze carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a low hum of insects rose and fell like a lullaby. Mabel skipped a few steps ahead, her lantern swinging cheerfully in her hand. "I can feel it," she whispered in excitement. "There's something magical waiting for us just around the corner." Stan groaned, though there was little conviction behind it. "The only thing waiting for us is probably poison ivy." But even he slowed as they reached the edge of a wide clearing. The sight that opened before them pulled the words from everyone's mouths. The meadow was alive with light. Tiny blossoms carpeted the ground, each one glowing faintly as though they had caught pieces of the stars above. The lantern's warm glow mingled with the silver of the moonlight, and together they lit the flowers in soft waves of color. For a long moment nobody moved. Even Mabel was quiet, her wide eyes reflecting the shimmer of the meadow. "It's like," she finally breathed, stepping carefully into the glow, "a sky that fell to the ground." Dipper crouched down, holding his lantern low so that it illuminated a cluster of petals. He brushed his fingers over them gently, half expecting the light to vanish at his touch, but the glow remained soft and steady. "They're bioluminescent," he murmured, awe in his voice. "It's natural, but still incredible. I've never seen anything like this." Wendy knelt beside him, her expression calm but curious. "Doesn't really matter what the science says," she whispered. "Feel like the forest left this here just for us." Stan huffed, though his voice had softened without him realizing. Glow-in-the-dark weeds. Big deal." Still he lingered near the edge of the clearing, his lantern tilted just enough to add its warmth to the meadow's glow. Mabel spun in slow circles, arms outstretched, her sweater sleeves catching the light like drifting stars. "I'm declaring this the most magical place we've ever found. Even more magical than the time I glued glitter on the toaster and made breakfast sparkles." "Which almost burned the house down," Dipper reminded her. "Worth it," she chirped, twirling once more before flopping gently onto the glowing flowers. She lay on her back, a lantern resting on her chest, gazing up at the night sky. It's like lying in two skies at once, stars above, stars below. Dipper hesitated, then joined her, placing his lantern carefully beside him. The flowers bent but didn't break, their glow rippling outward like water disturbed by a pebble. Wendy stretched out nearby, her lantern casting a calm halo around her. Even Stan eventually lowered himself onto a flat rock at the meadow's edge, his lantern balanced on his knee. For a while, none of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft hum of crickets, the sigh of the breeze, and the faint rustle of the glowing flowers as they shifted under Mabel's restless arms. It was Mabel who broke the quiet. "I wish we could stay here forever." Her voice was dreamy, tinged with the kind of happiness that only comes from being in the middle of something you know you'll always remember. Dipper folded his hands on his chest, watching the constellations above. If we did, maybe it wouldn't feel as special. Maybe, she agreed softly, but her smile didn't fade. The meadow's glow shifted gently as the breeze moved across it, as though the flowers were breathing. Their faint light reached up toward the lanterns, blending until the whole clearing shimmered with a steady, dreamlike glow. Wendy leaned back on her elbows, her hair spilling over her shoulders, her voice low and even. Places like this, you don't plan them. You just stumble into them, and suddenly you're somewhere you'll never forget. Dipper turned toward her slightly, his face illuminated in both lantern light and the silvery sheen of the blossoms. Exactly. It feels rare, like something we weren't supposed to find, but the forest decided to share anyway. Mabel tilted her head toward him, her eyes bright. Then we need to thank it. She cupped her hands around her mouth and called out to the trees at the meadow's edge. Thank you, forest. Her voice carried, echoing faintly before fading into the quiet. Stan rubbed his temple with a groan. You're gonna scare the birds, kid. Good, Mabel declared cheerfully. They'll get to see this too. Her laughter faded into the stillness, leaving only the soft glow of the flowers and the faint hum of night insects. The meadow seemed to cradle their voices, holding onto the words and keeping them safe. Dipper set his lantern carefully on the ground beside him, then pulled out his journal. He hesitated before opening it, his fingers brushing over the familiar worn cover. For once, he wasn't sure if he wanted to record what he saw. There was a part of him that worried writing it down might pin it in place, stealing some of its magic. He looked up and caught Wendy's gaze. She tilted her head, her voice steady. Not everything has to go in that book, you know. Dipper gave a small nod and slid it back into his vest without opening it. Yeah. Maybe this is one of those things you just keep in your memory. Exactly, she said softly, letting her lantern light spill across the petals near her hand. Mabel had grown quiet again, her lantern resting against her shoulder as she traced shapes in the air with her free hand. Do you think the flowers know they're glowing? She asked. Stan snorted. What kind of question is that? A very important one, Mabel sat up suddenly, pointing her lantern toward the blossoms. Look at them. They don't even realize how pretty they are. They're just being themselves. She pressed a hand over her chest, her voice softening. That's kind of how we are too, right? Just walking around, not even realizing we're glowing sometimes. Wendy chuckled, shaking her head. That's actually a pretty good thought. Dipper smiled faintly, though his voice stayed quiet. Leave it to Mabel to compare us to glowing flowers. Hey, Mabel said with a grin. If the flower crown fits, wear it. For a while, the four of them sat in contented silence. The meadow pulsed with light, as though it were alive, and the lanterns added their steady flames to the glow. It was impossible to tell where one light ended and another began. Finally, Stan broke the stillness, his voice gruff but softer than usual. All right, we've stared at shiny weeds long enough. Let's keep moving before I start writing poetry. Mabel gasped in mock horror. Stan poetry? We can't leave until we hear it. Not happening, Stan grumbled, standing with a grunt. Come on, before the bugs eat us alive. Wendy stood and brushed off her jeans, her lantern swinging casually at her side. Dipper rose more slowly, pausing to glance back at the meadow. He tried to burn the sight into his mind. The soft glow, the hush of the night, the way the flowers seemed to breathe with the wind. As they stepped away, the flowers rippled behind them, their light dimming slightly as though sighing in farewell. Mabel gave a final wave toward the meadow. Goodbye, glow babies. We'll come back, Stan muttered. Not if I have anything to say about it. though his voice carried the faintest trace of a smile. The forest path welcomed them again, the trees closing in gently as the clearing disappeared behind. But the glow seemed to follow in memory, the lanterns shining steadier now, as though they carried a piece of the meadow's light with them. The forest deepened as they walked, the canopy stretching above them like a stitched quilt of branches and stars. Their lanterns bobbed in rhythm, casting soft halos on the ground. For a while, none of them spoke, letting the night wrap around them in silence. It was Mabel, of course, who broke it first. She swung her lantern playfully, the light scattering across the bark of the trees. "Do you think animals have their own lantern walks? Like, what if there are deer out there right now carrying little glowing mushrooms on sticks?" Wendy laughed lightly. "That's a pretty wild picture." Dipper adjusted his hat, his tone thoughtful. "Well, bioluminescence does exist. Fireflies, certain fungi. Maybe it's not so impossible." Stan shook his head. "Next thing you know, you'll be telling me squirrels are holding secret disco parties in the treetops." Mabel gasped. "What if they are? And we just never get invited?" "Kid, if squirrels are having a party, it's beyond. Bring your own nuts." That earned a round of quiet chuckles. The laughter lingered, soft and easy, and then faded into the rhythm of the steps. Dipper found himself listening to the forest carefully. The shuffle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the creak of a branch above them. But it wasn't threatening, not tonight. The sounds were steady like background music that guided their walk. The path sloped downward, leading them toward the sound of water. A stream wound its way between the trees, its surface catching the glow of their lanterns. Tiny ripples broke the reflection, making the light dance across the current. "Whoa," Mabel whispered, crouching near the bank. "It's like the water's stealing our lantern light and turning it into sparkles." She reached out with her fingers, brushing the cool surface. "Don't fall in," Stan warned, though there was no sharpness in his voice. Wendy knelt beside Mabel, dipping her own hand briefly into the stream. The water caught the glow of her lantern, shimmering around her fingers. "It feels good. Cold, but nice." Dipper stepped closer, studying the way the current carried the reflections downstream. "It almost looks like the lanterns are traveling farther than we are, like the water's carrying a piece of us ahead into the forest." Mabel clapped softly, eyes wide. "Yes, lantern selves on an adventure of their own. I bet they're going to meet fish with tiny glow sticks." "Or get eaten by them," Stan muttered, though the edge of his mouth twitched upward. They lingered by the stream, watching the light play across the surface. The air smelled fresh, filled with damp earth and the faint tang of pine. Above them, the stars peeked through the branches, brighter here where the canopy opened. Dipper tilted his head back, staring upward. "It's so strange. During the day, this path probably looks ordinary. But at night, with the lanterns and the stars, it feels like we're walking through a different world." Wendy leaned against a tree, her voice low. "That's the thing about nights like this. They turn the ordinary into something you won't forget." Mabel sighed dreamily, plopping onto a rock and hugging her lantern to her chest. "I wish we could walk forever. No bedtime, no rules, just glowing and wandering until morning." Stan raised an eyebrow. "Until morning? Kid, I can barely make it until midnight." But he didn't tell her no, not tonight. They crossed the stream carefully, stones placed just right for stepping. The lanterns swayed above the water, the reflections following beneath, like twin lights walking in silence. On the far side, the path narrowed, curving into a gentle climb. The forest thickened again, but their lanterns lit the way steadily, pushing back the shadows. For a while, their footsteps and the soft hum of night creatures were the only sounds. The hush of the forest wasn't empty, it was rich, full of presence. Every rustle seemed to acknowledge them. Every whisper of wind seemed to fold into their walk. Dipper glanced sideways at his sister, her face glowing in the lantern's light. She was humming softly, a tune she'd just made up. It was off-key, playful, and yet it fit perfectly with the forest's quiet song. Wendy caught the tune and, without a word, whistled along. The sound was faint, weaving into Mabel's humming. Even Stan didn't interrupt. For once he let the kids' voices drift into the night unchallenged. The song didn't need words, it was just sound rising and falling, becoming part of the forest's breath. When it finally faded, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt whole. The path bent sharply, and soon they found themselves beneath a cluster of ancient pines. Their trunks rose tall and straight, like pillars holding up the night sky. The lantern light barely reached their tops, leaving the upper branches lost in shadow. Wendy ran her hand along the rough bark of one tree, pausing for a moment. These feel older than the rest, like they've been standing here forever. Dipper joined her, setting his lantern down at the base of the trunk. There are some trees in the world that can live thousands of years. I wonder how long these have been watching over this path. Long enough to be tired of kids gawking at him, Stan muttered, though his tone was light. Mabel pressed her ear against one trunk dramatically. Shh, I'm listening. Maybe they're whispering to each other. She pulled back with a grin. Nope, just tree stomachs growling. Stan pinched the bridge of his nose, but Wendy smiled. I like that idea, actually. Trees talking to each other. Makes the forest feel alive. It already feels alive, Dipper said quietly, glancing around. The lanterns made the shadows flicker like movement, as if unseen figures drifted just out of sight. But it wasn't frightening. Not tonight. It was comforting. Like being surrounded by quiet guardians. They pressed onward, the trail weaving between the trunks. The air grew cooler here, sharper with the scent of resin. The pines stood so close together it almost felt like stepping into a hall, the branches above closing like a vaulted ceiling. This is the forest palace, Mabel whispered, lifting her lantern high. The glow spilled across the bark, catching on bits of sap that gleamed like tiny jewels. Dipper smiled at the sight. You're right. It really does look like it. Stan glanced up. If this is a palace, I'm not bowing to any squirrels and crowns, you hear me? Wendy laughed softly. Relax, Stan. You'd probably be the king anyway. Guess I'd make a pretty good king. Rule number 1, mandatory naps every afternoon. Rule number 2, no salads allowed. Mabel gasped. A land of naps and junk food? I'm in. They emerged from the pines into another clearing, smaller than the meadow, but no less breathtaking. The ground was dotted with mushrooms that glowed faintly, their caps painted in soft blues and greens. It looked like the earth itself was holding lanterns. Mabel crouched down, her eyes wide. Mushroom babies! She leaned closer, careful not to touch. They're glowing like they're having their own tiny party. Dipper knelt beside her, studying them closely. Bioluminescent fungi. Some species glow to attract insects that help spread their spores. It's pretty rare, though. I didn't think we'd see them here. Wendy bent to look too, her lantern brushing light across their caps. So, nature's nightlights. Exactly, Dipper said, his voice hushed with awe. Stan grunted, but crouched down all the same. Well, I'll be. Free mood lighting. He gave the cluster a nod as though approving of their effort. They stayed there for a while, just watching the mushrooms glow. The forest around them seemed to lean closer, listening, its shadows gentler now. The air was filled with the faint, earthy scent of the fungi, grounding them in the present moment. Mabel eventually sat cross-legged on the ground, hugging her lantern. I feel like the forest is showing us all its secrets tonight. First the meadow, now this. What's next? Glowing raccoons? Singing rocks? Wouldn't put it past this place, Wendy said, smiling. Dipper nodded slowly, his voice quiet. It feels like it wants us to see it this way. Not just as something mysterious or scary, but as something alive. Something worth remembering. Stan stood with a grunt, brushing off his knees. Well, we're remembering, all right. My back's not gonna let me forget this little pit stop. They laughed softly, the sound carrying gently through the trees. Then together they rose and continued their walk, the mushrooms glowing faintly behind them like watchful eyes. The forest thickened again, but now every step felt touched by light, whether from the lanterns, the blossoms, or the glowing fungi. It was as though the night itself had joined their walk, guiding them forward. As they moved on, the glow of the mushrooms faded behind them, replaced by the steady rhythm of their lanterns. The forest no longer felt like something they were passing through. It felt like a companion, walking with them in silence. Mabel swung her lantern gently, her voice soft. It's like the night is giving us gifts. Then let's not waste them, Wendy replied, steady and calm. Dipper nodded, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. Every step feels like it's leading us deeper into the heart of something, bigger than us, something we might never fully understand. Stan grumbled, but even his voice was quieter now. As long as it leads back to someplace I can sit down, I'll take it. The lanterns glowed in answer, their flames steady as though promising the journey wasn't over yet. And together, with the forest leaning close, they kept walking. The trail from Star Meadow curved back into the forest, narrow and lined with roots that reached like old fingers across the path. The lanterns swung low in their hands, each flame glowing steady but soft, their golden circles of light overlapping and shifting as they walked. The forest seemed quieter now, as though the meadow had taken most of the night's sparkle with it. But in place of that brightness came something else, an intimacy, a closeness that made each step feel slower, more careful. Their voices carried gently, as if the trees themselves leaned in to listen. Mabel, still buzzing from their discovery, skipped ahead a few steps and twirled her lantern dramatically. That was the best thing ever. 10 out of 10. 5 stars. Would recommend to a friend. She paused, then added with a grin, but only if the friend is, like, super trustworthy. This is exclusive content. Exclusive content? Stan repeated, raising a brow. What are you, a meadow influencer now? Exactly, Mabel said, striking a pose that made her lantern wobble dangerously. Coming soon, Star Meadow merch. Glow-in-the-dark sweaters. Limited edition. Wendy chuckled under her breath, steady as ever. You'd make a fortune? Dipper shook his head, though he couldn't quite hide his smile. If you start selling merch for a meadow, I'm not helping you design it. Your loss, Mabel said, spinning back toward the path with a dramatic sigh. The trail dipped downward, the mist gathering again in pale patches that curled around their feet like soft fabric. The sound of the stream followed them faintly, though now it seemed distant, replaced by the chorus of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. Dipper's lantern light slid across the bark of a fallen tree, its surface covered in moss that glistened faintly with dew. He slowed for a moment, brushing his hand across it, the dampness cool against his palm. You ever think about how old some of these trees must be? He asked quietly. Like they've seen more than any of us ever will. Sure, Wendy said with a shrug. But I bet they're not stressing about it. They're just being trees. Mabel gasped softly, as if the thought had just struck her. Oh no, what if the trees are listening? What if they've been keeping secrets for centuries, just waiting for the right person to hear them? Stan rolled his eyes. If they're keeping secrets, they better spill something useful. Like where the nearest diner is. But even he slowed his steps slightly, eyes flicking up toward the canopy as though half wondering if the trees might respond. They kept on, the lanterns swaying in rhythm. The air felt heavier in this stretch of the forest, not in a frightening way, but in the way of places that carry memory. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the flutter of wings overhead, seemed to arrive with meaning, as though the woods wanted them to pay attention. Mabel filled the hush with her voice, humming an offbeat tune that bounced between cheerful and eerie. Dipper recognized it instantly. That's the theme from that puppet show you made me watch, isn't it? Puppetopia deserves more respect, Mabel said dramatically. It's an underappreciated masterpiece. Wendy gave her a thumbs up. Solid taste. Finally, someone understands art when they see it, Mabel declared, holding her lantern high like a trophy. Stan muttered something about puppets giving him the creeps, but didn't argue further. The path widened again after a while, opening onto a small clearing where the ground was covered with pine needles, soft and springy underfoot. The lantern's glow caught on something unusual. Carved shapes on a cluster of stones that stood in a rough circle. Dipper froze, his eyes locking onto the markings. Whoa, look at this. Mabel hurried over, crouching beside one of the stones. Are these doodles? 'Cause if so, someone's got competition. They're not doodles, Dipper said, leaning closer with his lantern. The carvings were faint, worn down by years of weather, but they clearly formed patterns, spirals, triangles, and lines that seemed to weave together into something larger. Wendy tilted her lantern toward the stones. Looks like some kind of old campsite, and maybe people used to stop here a long time ago. Stan narrowed his eyes. Or it's just graffiti from some bored hikers. But Dipper shook his head, his tone certain. No, this is older. Way older. The four of them stood in the circle of stones, lanterns casting long shadows across the carvings. The air felt different here, denser, like the forest was holding its breath. Mabel's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you think it's like magic? Dipper hesitated, his heart tugging between excitement and caution. I don't know, but it feels important. The carvings shimmered faintly under the lantern light, though it was probably just the way the shadows played across the rough stone. Still, it was enough to make Mabel lean in closer, her eyes wide with wonder. She pressed her palms against the cool surface and whispered, Tell us your secrets, Rock. Stan groaned. Kid, if the rock starts talking back, we're leaving. No discussion. Wendy crouched beside Mabel, tracing one of the spirals with a fingertip. It's kind of pretty, though. Almost looks like the designs on some old blankets my grandma has. Patterns that mean stuff. Dipper nodded, his brows furrowed in concentration. Yeah, it's not random. Look, the spirals connect, like they're leading toward the center, and those triangles... He paused, adjusting his lantern to get a better look. They almost look like mountains, Mabel gasped, immediately spinning toward him. Maybe it's a treasure map, or a clue, or a treasure clue. Or maybe, Stan cut in, it's just rocks. I know rocks when I see them, and you know what they usually mean. Nothing. Dipper didn't argue, though his curiosity burned behind his eyes. He felt that familiar itch to open his journal, to sketch the carvings and try to decode them, but something held him back. The night had a stillness, a fragile kind of quiet, and he didn't want to shatter it with scratching pens and frantic theories. Not yet. Instead, he lowered his lantern, watching how the golden glow filled the spiral shapes. Even if it's nothing, he said softly, it's beautiful. Mabel, still crouched beside the stone, tilted her head. What if the people who carved this were doing exactly what we're doing? Walking with lanterns, making wishes, and then they left their doodles here so they'd be remembered. Stan raised an eyebrow. You think a bunch of ancient forest people wasted their time scratching triangles into rocks instead of building something useful? Hey, doodles are important, Mabel said, puffing up with mock indignation. If I were carving rocks, I'd definitely make spirals. Spirals are classic. Wendy chuckled. Honestly, Mabel might be onto something. Maybe this was their version of, like, writing in a diary. That thought lingered in the air, soft and unspoken. Dipper found himself glancing around the circle of stones, imagining people long gone, their lanterns glowing just like his. For a moment, he felt connected to something larger than himself. Not in a scary way, but in a way that made the night feel deeper, richer. The group lingered only a little longer before moving on. The path curved away from the clearing, the stones fading into the trees behind them. The forest closed in again, quiet except for their footsteps and the creak of branches in the breeze. Mabel skipped ahead, swinging her lantern as though to shake off the heaviness of the carvings. I called dibs on discovering the next magical thing. No takebacks. Stan muttered something about magical bills from the chiropractor, but his lantern light stayed steady as he walked. As they pressed deeper into the woods, the mist thickened again, curling up from the ground and catching the lantern glow like spun gold. The path narrowed, but the forest wasn't menacing. It simply felt older here, as though every root and stone had been resting in place for centuries. Dipper slowed his pace, listening. The usual chirps of crickets had gone quiet, replaced by the faint rustle of leaves high above. His lantern swayed in his grip, casting shifting shadows that stretched across the trunks. He caught Wendy's eye, and she gave him a small nod, wordless but steady, as if to say, "It's fine." Then, as if to prove it, Mabel let out a dramatic gasp. "Guys, look!" She darted off the path toward a cluster of low bushes. For a split second, Dipper's stomach clenched, but then he saw what she was pointing at. A gathering of fireflies. Dozens of them, blinking in and out, their soft yellow glow weaving like tiny lanterns of their own. Mabel twirled through them, holding her lantern high so the flames and the fireflies seemed to dance together. "It's a lantern party!" she cried. Wendy laughed, swinging her own lantern in a slow arc. The fireflies responded, their lights flickering brighter, almost as if they were answering. Dipper felt his shoulders relax. He stepped into the glow, the fireflies brushing past him, like sparks caught in the air. "It's amazing," he murmured. Stan hung back a little, though even he couldn't resist the sight. "Well, I'll be. Free entertainment. Finally, something in this forest that doesn't charge admission." The group lingered there, moving slowly through the swarm of gentle light. The fireflies rose and fell, surrounding them in a glow that rivaled their lanterns, until it felt like they were walking through a living constellation. Mabel stretched out her arms, spinning with her eyes closed. Best night ever. Eventually, the fireflies began to drift away, rising into the higher branches until the glow thinned, leaving the group once more with only their lanterns for light. The forest seemed darker by comparison, though not in a frightening way, more like a curtain closing on a show. Mabel gave an exaggerated sigh. "Well, there goes my new best friend club. Goodbye, twinkle bugs." She waved dramatically after them, her lantern swinging with the motion. Wendy nudged her lightly. "Don't worry, Mabel. You got us. We're way cooler than fireflies anyway." "Debatable," Mabel said, grinning. "But okay, I'll allow it." Stan straightened his back with a grunt. "All right. Are we done playing with bugs? because I'd like to make it back before sunrise, preferably before my feet stage a protest. Dipper adjusted his cap, glancing up at the path ahead. We'll keep moving. I think the trail circles back around eventually. The journal mentioned... He stopped himself, lips pressing together. He hadn't meant to bring up the journal tonight. Tonight wasn't about studying or solving mysteries. It was about walking, about being together. Still, a part of him couldn't help noticing how the trail was growing narrower, almost as though the forest itself was nudging them in a particular direction. They walked in quiet for a while, the only sound the crunch of pine needles underfoot, and the occasional creak of lantern handles. Above, the branches tangled so thickly that only a sliver of sky showed through, dotted with faint stars. Then, faint at first, came another sound. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like humming, but not quite. It drifted through the trees in waves, weaving in and out of the silence. Mabel froze mid-step, holding her lantern aloft. "Did you guys hear that?" Wendy tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah. Sounds kind of like singing, or wine through pipes or something." Stan groaned. "Great. Just what we need. Haunted wind." Dipper's grip tightened on his lantern, but instead of fear, he felt something else. Curiosity. The sound wasn't harsh or threatening. It was soothing, if anything, like a lullaby carried on the breeze. Without a word, he started forward, following the sound. The others hesitated only a moment before trailing after him. The trees parted just enough to reveal a shallow ravine, its sides lined with moss and wildflowers. At the bottom trickled a narrow stream, catching bits of moonlight and silver flashes, and above it, swaying gently in the breeze, hung dozens of little glass bottles strung from branches with twine. Each bottle held a faint glow, like captured fireflies, or maybe the reflection of their lanterns. When the wind stirred them, they clinked softly against one another, producing the strange, melodic sound. Mabel's jaw dropped. "Okay, either this is the world's prettiest recycling project, or we just found fairy treasure." Dipper stepped closer, his lantern light washing over the nearest bottles. The glow inside wasn't fireflies, after all. It looked more like dust, shimmering and swirling faintly, as though the bottles had trapped pieces of starlight. Wendy leaned on the ravine's edge, watching the way the bottles swayed. "It's kind of beautiful, huh? Like a wind chime, but magical." Stan crossed his arms. "Or like someone got bored and decided to hang their trash in the trees." Still, he didn't move away. His gaze lingered on the glowing bottles longer than his words admitted. Mabel scrambled down the gentle slope toward the stream, her boots slipping slightly on the moss. "Can we take one home, please? I promise I'll feed it and water it and—" "No," Stan interrupted immediately. "Last time you brought something glowing home, it tried to eat the curtains." Mabel pouted dramatically, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she crouched near the water, peering at the bottles hanging just out of reach. "It's like they're singing to us. Don't you feel it? Like they're happy we found them." Dipper crouched beside her, his lantern flickering in the cool air. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the sound wash over him. The soft clink of glass, the faint hum of the wind, the burble of the stream. It wasn't just beautiful. It felt purposeful somehow, like the forest had been leading them here all along. He glanced back at Wendy and Stan, who had settled at the ravine's edge, their lanterns glowing steady. For a moment, he felt the same quiet connection he had at the stone circle earlier, only stronger now. "Maybe we were supposed to find this," Dipper said softly. Wendy gave him a small smile. "Yeah, maybe we were." Mabel leaned closer to one of the bottles, her breath fogging the glass. The shimmer inside seemed to stir at her presence, glowing a little brighter for just a moment before settling back into its slow, drifting swirl. Her eyes sparkled with wonder. Okay, that one definitely winked at me. I think it likes me. Stan squinted down at her from the slope, tugging at his fez. Kid, it's dust in a jar. Unless you're planning to start dating cleaning supplies, let's not get carried away. Pfft, Mabel huffed. But she smiled all the same. She touched the mossy bank with her free hand, grounding herself. It feels happy here. Dipper set his lantern carefully on the ground and studied the bottles more closely. The twine was weathered, frayed in places, but the bottles themselves looked untouched by time, as though whatever was inside kept them preserved. He reached up, hesitated, then pulled his hand back. Wendy noticed. Thinking about taking one? He shook his head. No, it doesn't feel right, like they're not meant to be moved. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, some things are better left where they belong. Mabel rocked back on her heels, then flopped onto the moss with a sigh, hugging her lantern to her chest. I wish I could stay here forever, just listening, just glowing. Her words seemed to drift into the air, absorbed by the gentle chime of the bottles. The sound shifted for a moment, softer, sweeter, almost like it was answering her. Dipper glanced at her, his chest tightening with something he couldn't name. He knew Mabel made wishes often, on stars, on birthday candles, on random puddles that happened to sparkle a little. But here, with the lanterns and the bottles, and the forest alive around them, her wish felt heavier, realer. Stan cleared his throat gruffly, breaking the moment. All right. Enough bottle staring. We got our fun. Let's keep moving before one of you gets the bright idea to smash one open and unleash bottled-up forest ghosts. Mabel sat up quickly. Do you think there are bottled-up forest ghosts? No, Stan glared, though it lacked its usual sharpness. But with our luck, there would be. Wendy chuckled as she pushed herself off the ravine's edge, sliding down the slope with ease. She landed beside the twins, brushing dirt from her jeans. Come on. He's right. Let's keep going. We can always visit again. Dipper hesitated a moment longer, letting his lantern's light spill across the glowing bottles. Then he exhaled, picked up his lantern, and nodded. Okay, let's go. The group climbed back up the other side of the ravine, their lanterns bobbing like small stars against the darkness. Behind them, the bottles swayed once more, their clinking song following them until the trees swallowed it up. The trail grew steeper as they walked, winding upward through the forest. The mist thinned as they climbed, and the air grew sharper, carrying the crisp scent of pine and cold stone. Stan groaned with each incline. If this trail doesn't lead directly to a donut stand, I'm demanding a refund. Wendy smirked over her shoulder. Pretty sure that's not how nature works, Mr. Pines. Then nature's been doing it wrong all these years. Mabel bounded ahead, surprisingly unbothered by the climb. Come on, slowpokes. The higher we go, the closer we get to the stars. She twirled her lantern in wide circles, making the lights scatter across the trees like tiny constellations. Dipper followed at a steadier pace, his eyes scanning the path. The forest up here felt different. Quieter, almost reverent, like they were intruding on sacred ground. It wasn't threatening, though. If anything, it was welcoming them upward, step by step. Finally, the trees began to thin, and a pale glow shimmered ahead. Not lantern light, not moonlight, something else. Mabel gasped, breaking into a run. We found it. The secret Star Palace. Slow down, Dipper called, though his own pace quickened despite himself. The others hurried to catch up as the path widened, opening onto a rocky ledge high above the forest. The glow came not from any structure, but from the sky itself. A sweeping view of the valley below, blanketed in mist that shimmered under the moon, and above, a canopy of stars so vast and bright, it felt like stepping into another world. Mabel stopped in her tracks, her lantern dangling at her side. Whoa! Wendy let out a low whistle. Now that's a view. Stan grunted, though even he couldn't hide the awe in his tone. Huh. Guess that was worth the uphill torture. Dipper stood silently, his breath caught in his throat. He'd seen stars before. Dozens of nights sprawled out in Gravity Falls had shown him plenty. But here, at this height, with the forest spread out like a sea below them, it felt different. Closer. More alive. The four of them stood together at the ledge, their lanterns glowing soft and golden at their sides. Above, the stars shimmered brighter than any flame, as though the night had been saving its most beautiful secret just for them. Mabel leaned closer to one of the bottles, her breath fogging the glass. The shimmer inside seemed to stir at her presence, glowing a little brighter for just a moment before settling back into its slow, drifting swirl. Her eyes sparkled with wonder. Okay, that one definitely winked at me. I think it likes me. Stan squinted down at her from the slope, tugging at his fez. Kid, it's dust in a jar. Unless you're planning to start dating cleaning supplies, let's not get carried away. Puh, Mabel huffed. But she smiled all the same. She touched the mossy bank with her free hand, grounding herself. It feels happier. Dipper set his lantern carefully on the ground and studied the bottles more closely. The twine was weathered, frayed in places, but the bottles themselves looked untouched by time, as though whatever was inside kept them preserved. He reached up, hesitated, then pulled his hand back. Wendy noticed. Thinking about taking one? He shook his head. No, it doesn't feel right, like they're not meant to be moved. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, some things are better left where they belong. Mabel rocked back on her heels, then flopped onto the moss with a sigh, hugging her lantern to her chest. I wish I could stay here forever, just listening, just glowing. Her words seemed to drift into the air, absorbed by the gentle chime of the bottles. The sound shifted for a moment, softer, sweeter, almost like it was answering her. Dipper glanced at her, his chest tightening with something he couldn't name. He knew Mabel made wishes often, on stars, on birthday candles, on random puddles that happened to sparkle a little. But here, with the lanterns and the bottles and the forest alive around them, her wish felt heavier, realer. Stan cleared his throat gruffly, breaking the moment. All right. Enough bottle staring. We've had our fun. Let's keep moving before one of you gets the bright idea to smash one open and unleash bottled-up forest ghosts. Mabel sat up quickly. Do you think there are bottled-up forest ghosts? No. Stan glared, though it lacked its usual sharpness. But with our luck, there would be. Wendy chuckled as she pushed herself off the ravine's edge, sliding down the slope with ease. She landed beside the twins, brushing dirt from her jeans. Come on. He's right. Let's keep going. We can always visit again. Dipper hesitated a moment longer, letting his lantern's light spill across the glowing bottles. Then he exhaled, picked up his lantern, and nodded. Okay. Let's go. The group climbed back up the other side of the ravine, their lanterns bobbing like small stars against the darkness. Oh, behind them, the bottles swayed once more, their clinking song following them until the trees swallowed it up. The trail grew steeper as they walked, winding upward through the forest. The mist thinned as they climbed, and the air grew sharper, carrying the crisp scent of pine and cold stone. Stan groaned with each incline. If this trail doesn't lead directly to a donut stand, I'm demanding a refund. Wendy smirked over her shoulder. Pretty sure that's not how nature works, Mr. Pines. Then nature's been doing it wrong all these years. Mabel bounded ahead, surprisingly unbothered by the climb. Come on, slowpokes. The higher we go, the closer we get to the stars. She twirled her lantern in wide circles, making the light scatter across the trees like tiny constellations. Dipper followed at a steadier pace, his eyes scanning the path. The forest up here felt different, quieter, almost reverent, like they were intruding on sacred ground. It wasn't threatening, though. If anything, it was welcoming them upward, step by step. Finally, the trees began to thin, and a pale glow shimmered ahead. Not lantern light, not moonlight, something else. Mabel gasped, breaking into a run. "We found it! The secret star palace!" "Slow down," Dipper called, though his own pace quickened despite himself. The others hurried to catch up as the path widened, opening onto a rocky ledge high above the forest. The glow came not from any structure, but from the sky itself, a sweeping view of the valley below, blanketed in mist that shimmered under the moon, and above a canopy of stars so vast and bright it felt like stepping into another world. Mabel stopped in her tracks, her lantern dangling at her side. "Whoa!" Wendy let out a low whistle. "Now that's a view." Stan grunted, though even he couldn't hide the awe in his tone. "Huh. Guess that was worth the uphill torture." Dipper stood silently, his breath caught in his throat. He'd seen stars before. Dozens of nights sprawled out in Gravity Falls had shown him plenty. But here, at this height, with the forest spread out like a sea below them, it felt different. Closer. More alive. The four of them stood together at the ledge, their lanterns glowing soft and golden at their sides. Above, the stars shimmered brighter than any flame, as though the night had been saving its most beautiful secret just for them. The ledge seemed to hold them in stillness, like time itself had decided to pause. For a while, no one spoke. The forest below stretched endlessly, dark but not unfriendly, while above, the stars scattered themselves in endless patterns. The lanterns at their sides glowed softly, as though they too were humbled by the night sky. Mabel was the first to break the silence. She sat up suddenly, eyes sparkling in the lantern light. "Okay, I declare this the best night in Gravity Falls history. Maybe the best night in world history." She flung her arms toward the sky dramatically. "Congratulations, everyone. You were here for it," Wendy laughed quietly, tucking her hair behind one ear. "Guess we're pretty lucky, huh?" "Lucky's one word for it," Stan grumbled, though his tone was lighter than usual. "Another word would be exhausted. My back feels like I carried this whole mountain up here." "Technically you carried yourself," Dipper said without missing a beat. Stan shot him a look but didn't argue. He simply pulled his hat lower and muttered, "Smart mouth." Mabel hopped onto her feet, her lantern swinging at her side. She tiptoed toward the edge of the ledge, peering down at the mist-covered valley. "It looks like the whole world's under a giant, fluffy blanket." She cupped her hands around her mouth. "Good night, world." Her voice echoed faintly, fading into the trees. Dipper watched her, the corners of his mouth twitching upward despite himself. He wasn't as dramatic as Mabel, but he felt the same weight in his chest. The good kind of weight, the kind that came when you knew you were part of something bigger than yourself. He pulled out his journal, hesitating. He could draw the stars, the ravine, even the strange glowing bottles. But for once he wasn't sure if it was necessary. Some memories, he thought, didn't need to be trapped in ink. Some were better carried in the heart. Slowly he slipped the journal back into his bag. Wendy stretched out her legs, leaning back on her hands. "You know, nights like this, they make you realize how much there is out there. Like, we think Gravity Falls is weird, but maybe the whole universe is just one big mystery." Dipper's eyes lit up at her words. "Exactly. That's what I've always thought. There's so much we don't know, so much to explore." "And so much to nap through," Stan interrupted, stifling a yawn. I say we wrap this little stargazing field trip before I turn into a fossil. Mabel spun on her heel, pointing a finger at him like a judge. No, we can't go yet. We have to make a wish. You can't look at the stars this pretty and not make a wish. Pretty sure that's not a law, Stan said dryly. It is now, Mabel insisted. She dropped back onto the ground, crossing her legs and holding her lantern in her lap. Everybody, close your eyes, and no peeking. Wendy grinned and played along immediately, shutting her eyes. Dipper followed more reluctantly, but after a moment, he let his lids fall shut too. Even Stan sighed and lowered his head, muttering something about peer pressure. The four of them sat in silence, their lanterns glowing steady around them. Above, the stars seemed brighter than ever, casting a silver sheen across the ledge. The night was still waiting. Mabel whispered into the quiet. Okay? Everyone think of something. Something you want to come true. Dipper's thoughts flickered rapidly. Knowledge, discoveries, the safety of his family. The hope that summer would never really end. Mabel thought of laughter and adventures and the feeling of always having someone by her side. Wendy thought of freedom, of wide skies and paths that never ended. And Stan, though he would never admit it, thought of the kids beside him, safe and happy, exactly as they were. No one said their wishes aloud, but the stars seemed to hear them anyway. When they opened their eyes again, the moment felt different, softer, brighter. See? Mabe whispered, hugging her lantern. Now the night knows our secrets. For a while, nobody moved. The silence wasn't heavy or awkward. It was comfortable. The kind of silence that filled itself with meaning. Their lanterns flickered gently in the breeze, golden circles of warmth against the cool blue of the night. Then Mabel suddenly leapt up, breaking the spell. Okay. One more thing before we head back. She rummaged through her sweater pocket and triumphantly pulled out a handful of glitter. Dipper groaned instantly. Mabel, no. Yes, she declared, tossing the sparkling dust into the air. The lantern light caught it, scattering tiny reflections like 1,000 miniature stars raining down around them. Mabel spun beneath the shimmer, laughing. Ta-da! The universe just got a little shinier. Wendy tilted her head back, watching the glitter drift slowly down before dissolving into the stone. You know what? It actually works. Kind of like the grand finale of a fireworks show. Stan coughed, brushing sparkles from his jacket. Fantastic. Now I'll be picking glitter out of my clothes until next year. Thanks, Mabel. But his grumble was softened by the faintest twitch of a smile. Dipper shook his head, but couldn't help chuckling under his breath. That was Mabel, turning quiet moments into celebrations. As the glitter faded, the cool air grew sharper, reminding them how late it had become. A thin veil of mist curled back up from the forest below, climbing like fingers toward the ledge. Wendy exhaled, her breath visible in the chill. We should probably start heading down before it gets too cold. Finally, Stan said, standing with a grunt and brushing dust from his pants. I was starting to think we'd have to camp out up here. Mabel gasped, eyes widening. Camp out up here? That's genius. We could tell ghost stories under the stars, roast marshmallows on our lanterns, make constellations out of s'mores. No, Stan said immediately. Hard pass. We're leaving. Boo, Mabel muttered. But she fell into step as the group gathered their lanterns. They began the descent, their footsteps crunching softly against loose gravel and pine needles. The path down felt different than the climb up. Quieter, more reflective, as if the mountain itself wanted them to carry a piece of the starlit view back with them. Dipper glanced over his shoulder once more, taking in the endless expanse of sky. His lantern's glow seemed small in comparison, yet he didn't feel insignificant. Instead, he felt part of it. a small light among many, shining with purpose. The trail wound deeper into the trees, lanterns bobbing steadily. Occasionally, Mabel hummed a tune under her breath, soft and cheerful, her steps skipping lightly. Stan muttered about roots trying to trip him, though his lantern never wavered. Wendy walked with her usual easy stride, her gaze shifting often to the sky that peeked through the branches above. As they reached a gentler stretch of trail, the forest sounds began to return. An owl calling softly, the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. The night no longer felt vast and overwhelming. It felt alive, familiar. Mabel broke the quiet again, swinging her lantern dramatically. When we get back, can we write about tonight in a book? Like an official family adventure diary? Dipper raised a brow. Don't you already have, 12 diaries? Yeah, but those are mine, she said matter-of-factly. This would be for all of us. So years from now, when we're old and wrinkly, we can read it and remember how magical tonight was. Stan chuckled low in his throat. Kid, when I'm old and wrinkly, I'll be too busy napping to read some diary, but maybe you're onto something. He caught himself and quickly added, Not that I'm agreeing or anything. Wendy smirked. We'll let Mabel handle it. She's the best at making things sound magical. Mabel puffed up proudly, holding her lantern high. It's true. I have the sparkle touch. The forest seemed to nod in agreement, the trees swaying gently as though stirred by an invisible hand. The lantern light stretched across the path ahead, guiding them toward home. The trail grew narrower again, the trees arching overhead until their branches wove together like a natural roof. The lanterns painted shifting patterns on the bark, and the mist clung low to the ground, curling around their ankles with every step. Mabel skipped a few paces ahead, her laughter trailing behind her. I feel like we're in a parade of lanterns. We should have music. Quick, someone beatbox. Stan scowled. The only beat you're getting from me is the sound of my knees cracking. Wendy chuckled and gave a low thump on her lantern's metal handle, producing a hollow rhythm. There, parade music. Mabel immediately fell into step, swinging her lantern in time like a baton. Yes, march, march, march. Dipper sighed, but his lips quirked upward as he matched their pace. It wasn't really a parade, but walking together with their lanterns bobbing in sync, it felt close enough. The forest floor dipped, leading them back toward the stream they had crossed earlier. The water gleamed faintly under the moonlight, rippling gently. Dipper paused to glance at it, remembering the glowing bottles, swaying like living stars. He thought of the carvings, too, and the meadow of flowers, all pieces of the night, that seemed to add up to something greater. Wendy slowed beside him, her lantern casting silver light on the stream. You're thinking again. Always, he admitted softly. She smiled faintly. Don't think too hard. Sometimes it's enough to just be here. He nodded, letting the stream's soft murmur quiet the racing of his thoughts. Mabel crouched by the water, holding her lantern close so its glow rippled across the surface. It's like the forest is reflecting us, she said. See? The lanterns are like stars in the water. We're walking in the sky. Stan shook his head, though there was no bite to it. Kid, you could make paying taxes sound poetic. Mabel grinned. Thank you. They followed the stream until the path widened again, leading them deeper into familiar woods. The air felt warmer here, and the sounds of night creatures grew louder. It was as though the forest itself was easing them back toward home, step by step. Eventually, the glow of the shack appeared through the trees, distant but unmistakable, its windows like two welcoming eyes. Mabel gasped dramatically, pointing. Behold! Civilization! Running water! Refrigerators! And chairs, Stan muttered with relief. Glorious, glorious chairs! But instead of rushing ahead, they all slowed. The lanterns swung gently at their sides, their light mingling with the faint glow from the shack. None of them seemed ready to let the walk in just yet. Wendy was the first to voice it. "Kinda weird, huh? How you spend all night out here, and then suddenly, it's over." Dipper looked up at the trees one last time, their shadows deep but comforting. "Maybe that's what makes it special. You don't get nights like this every day. That's why you remember them." Mabel hugged her lantern close to her chest, her voice softer than usual. "I don't want to forget. Ever." Stan sighed, adjusting his hat as he glanced at the kids. For once, his expression softened completely, unguarded. "Don't worry, Pumpkin. You won't." The clearing opened fully, and the shack stood before them, familiar and a little crooked, but home. The porch light flickered faintly, greeting them like an old friend. For a moment, none of them moved. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their lanterns glowing in unison, holding on to the night for just a little longer. Mabel was the first to break the stillness, lifting her lantern high above her head. Okay. Final lantern salute before we go inside." She waved her arm in a grand arc, the flames glow scattering across the clearing. Dipper followed, raising his lantern more hesitantly, but with a small smile. Wendy joined in, leaning casually against the porch railing as she lifted hers. Stan grumbled, but eventually raised his own lantern too, though his mutter of, "This is ridiculous," was undercut by the corner of his mouth twitching upward. For a moment, the four lights gleamed together, brighter than they had all night, as though the forest itself leaned in to take note of their farewell. Then, one by one, they lowered their arms, the glow settling softly around them. Mabel was still buzzing with energy. "We should totally make this a yearly thing, a Lantern Walk Festival, with banners and games and—" Stan cut her off. "Kid, I'll allow it only if there's funnel cake." Wendy chuckled. "Not a bad idea, actually. But even if we don't, this night's not going to leave my brain anytime soon." Dipper was quiet, gazing at the shadows stretching from the shack into the woods. The lantern in his hand flickered, steady but delicate, like a heartbeat. "I think," he said carefully, "this was one of those nights that changes how you look at things. You don't even realize it until later, but you carry it with you." Stan glanced at him with a rare look of respect. "Huh. Deep thought from the kid. Guess all that staring at notebooks pays off once in a while." Mabel looped her arm around Dipper's shoulders, squeezing him tight. "See? You're not just the brains, you're the heart, too, my big nerdy, mushy brother." Dipper tried to wriggle free, blushing furiously. "Mabel!" But Wendy only smiled at the sight, her lantern catching the curve of her grin. "Don't fight it, dude. She's right." The porch creaked under their weight as they stepped up together. The wood felt familiar, grounding after the strangeness of the night. Dipper trailed his fingers along the railing. Mabel hopped in place with a bounce that made her lantern swing wildly, and Stan let out a long sigh of relief as if sitting down was the only goal worth achieving. Yet before they opened the door, they lingered one last time, facing the woods. The lanterns glowed steady in their hands, each flame a tiny witness to everything they'd seen. The meadow, the carvings, the stars on the ridge, the whispering trees. The forest looked ordinary now, dark and quiet, but they all knew better. Mabel broke the silence, softer this time. "Do you think the forest remembers us too?" Dipper hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. Maybe not the way we remember things, but yeah, it remembers." Wendy tilted her head back, exhaling a quiet laugh. "If it does, then I hope it remembers us like this. Not chasing monsters, not running from trouble, just walking." Stan gave a small grunt. But it wasn't disapproval, it was something closer to agreement. His lantern light caught the lines of his face, softer now than usual. could be worse ways to be remembered. Mabel, satisfied with that answer, gave her lantern one last swing, then carefully blew it out. The flame flickered stubbornly for a second, then disappeared, leaving only the smoke curling upward like a thread into the night. "Good night, lantern," she whispered. The others followed her lead. One by one the flames dimmed and vanished, until the clearing held only the faint porch light of the shack. The sudden darkness felt deeper, heavier, but not unwelcome. It was the natural end to their walk, the quiet close of the night's story. The four of them stood for just a beat longer, eyes adjusting to the softer dark. Then Stan reached for the doorknob. "All right, bedtime. And don't even think about waking me before noon tomorrow." Mabel giggled. Wendy yawned, and Dipper glanced back once more at the forest before stepping inside. The shack door creaked shut behind them, the sound echoing briefly before fading into the stillness. Inside, the lanterns rested on the counter, their metal warm from the night's glow, their glass clouded with the memory of flickering flames. Mabel tumbled onto the couch, hugging a pillow like it was another lantern. Wendy stretched across the armchair, long legs dangling lazily. Stan disappeared toward his room with a muttered, "Finally?" Dipper lingered a little longer at the window, staring out into the dark woods. They looked ordinary again, but he felt the weight of the night pressing gently at the edges of his thoughts, a reminder that magic didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. As he finally turned away, Mabel's voice floated through the room, soft with sleep. "Best. Lantern walk. Ever." Dipper smiled faintly, pulling a blanket over her. "Yeah, ever." And with that the house grew quiet, lanterns dim, dreams waiting, the forest outside cradling their secrets until the next night of wonder. Thank you for wandering with us tonight on the Sleep Hours. The lanterns have gone out, and the forest has returned to its silence. But the secrets of Gravity Falls still linger, waiting to be remembered in dreams. As you drift off, imagine the paths not yet taken, the whispers you might hear if you listened a little closer, and the glow of a lantern guiding you safely through the unknown. Good night, everyone. And until we meet again, may your dreams be filled with wonder.